people like to have speculated that there was some, undercover, covert reason why he was killed, and that he was coming back from a telescope. And I don't personally subscribe to the theory that Dr. Harrington was involved in a conspiracy and was killed because of Planet X information, but I really can't ascertain all the facts around his death to say that. There are obviously some anomalous parts to this story, and NASA has not been very forthcoming with the information as far as Planet X or Dr. Harrington's research. So it does raise a lot of eyebrows. What we're looking at here are basically astronomical plates of all the stars taken at the time in the region where Dr. Harrington thought a Planet X would be located. So what they would do is they would take these images of star fields and designate every single object in there as a known source, and then filter out the possibilities for what objects could possibly be Kuiper belt objects or a brown dwarf. Next slide, please. And real quickly, I should note that all of Dr. Harrington's data is still stored in the astronomical Harvard archives and are on public display. So anyone denouncing the whole idea that a Planet X doesn't exist or that this is some ludicrous idea, it is a Harvard accepted norm within the astronomical community that this data was documented and is still available to the public. So interestingly enough, advancing with the science, a few years later in the early 90s, we were scheduled to launch this probe called WIRE, the Wide Field Infrared Explorer. And this was a very interesting project because its main focus was actually to map supernovas and do some very specific imaging. And unfortunately, they had some software malfunctions after it launched, and they specifically denoted this satellite to planet finding. So in '99 or around that time, the WIRE telescope did basically almost 98% of the sky surveying, looking for possible candidates to be a Planet X, a brown dwarf, Kuiper belt objects that have been expelled and are now somewhat within our vicinity and are visible. And again, remember, this is infrared night. It's not infrared light. It's not visible to the naked eye. It's basically a heat signature. And so it's okay. That little image on the bottom left, let's just stop it there. That's fine. That little bottom left image that we had seen was just basically a simulation of what the field array would look like. And let's see. Hopefully, it doesn't look like this is going to be clicking. This should be a video playing. See if you can hit the key there. Go forward now. There we go. So we'll just let that run for a second. Very interestingly, yeah, I just remembered something else too. I didn't get to check to see if this launched. A satellite called the Space Infrared Telescope Facility was scheduled to launch yesterday and is basically our latest technology in space for detecting Kuiper belt objects, brown dwarfs, even failed supernovas. It has a very fine-tuned infrared lens looking at a very wide spectrum of light from very super cold to warm temperatures. The reason why SIRTIF is so interesting is that it's going to be able to pierce through these dense dust clouds that have been preventing us from being able to see far in past things like the Oort cloud, well beyond, and look through these there's like layers of dust just laying out in space that disrupt our view. Interestingly enough, the SIRTIF telescope, there was a conference recently at the Jet Propulsion Laboratories that I attended by a Dr. Michelle Fowler, and she's one of the lead astronomers on the project. I attended, of course, wanting to know about, will SIRTIF be able to see things like a Planet X? And I asked her specifically, will SIRTIF be looking for objects like a Planet X? And she said, yes, it will. But it takes very specific point images, meaning it'll look at specific areas, beaming that data back to Earth. And as you see here, it kind of has an orbit around the sun, just like our Earth does, just kind of follows a little bit the ways behind it. Now, the SIRTIF is going to be a collection, one of the final observatories that we have in space. We do have 4 or 5 satellites up there now collecting infrared data. And this is really the key thing to understanding the search for a Planet X through modern science. As we'll discuss in a minute, there are some very interesting ancient correlations, but tying that in, modern and ancient, this is the latest research that we have coming out of NASA and astronomical sites of reference to being able to actually locate a Planet X object. Now, a lot of people, again, will like to speculate that if this was discovered, that it would be covered up, or that we wouldn't be told. I can't really answer that question. I know NASA has been known, as a side note, instead of National Aeronautic Space Association, to be never a straight answer. But not counting just their track record, we have a very large amateur astronomy community that has always been on top of even the professional by things like the Hale-Bopp comet, the planetary alignment that took place. These things were all documented and accounted for by amateur astronomy before it became a professionally accepted norm. So if there is going to be a large object sighted, there are telescopes ground-based within the astronomical community and in the amateur astronomy field that will be able to cite these things, and it will get attention. Now, how that story will play out, we'll see. Next slide, please. So this is just showing a close-up of the Surf satellite. You can see the little Earth and our Moon there in the distance. It's kind of showing how it would be orbiting around the Sun. But this will be the latest observatory that we'll have in space for detecting large objects in space that could be a Planet X type scenario. Next slide, please. So give you an idea of a breakdown of what we're talking about when we talk about brown dwarfs or failed stars. This is about a Jupiter-sized planet from our solar system. And just to give you a breakdown of all this information, what we're looking at is the different classes of brown dwarfs that we see here. And the objects that range in space as far as visible light and in infrared light, there are so many of these things out there that it's not a question of imaging Planet X. It's literally of picking it out of the massive star field. They've got like 3,000 candidates when they snap off an image for what are Kuiper belt objects, which ones are brown dwarfs, and it's very hard and painstaking information to go through and catalog all of these different plates, figuring out which ones are actually known planets and which ones are candidates to be a possible a new addition to the star catalog. Next slide, please. So one of the satellites, or excuse me, one of the observatories that we have that's ground-based is the Keck Interferometer. And this one, very interesting, is very powerful in the sense that it is able to use two independent powerful lenses, focus in on one specific point, beam that data in and relay it in a 3D image on a central screen. So it gives them two independent sources of reference for being able to pinpoint a light source and focus in on it and analyze the data. And this again is some of the latest research that we would be using in citing, Kuiper belt objects, brown dwarfs, or Planet X objects in space. Next slide, please. So just to show that again, this is being documented in mainstream science. These are just several news articles saying that there is evidence to say there is something out there beyond Pluto, a companion to our sun, something out there, another body beyond Pluto. Next slide, please. A mystery revolves around the sun, something out there affecting the planets. And all of these researchers around the world are, challenging the current model for what is an accepted norm, but it's still not an accepted idea that there is a 10th planet within our solar system. Yet, next slide, the data clearly suggests that we are right on the coattails of discovering something, as shown by this article. This was an ABC News article. Yeah, it says it there. Next slide, please. So, jumping ahead here again, as I said, I'm going to try and get into some of the more esoteric points. Aside from all the modern science that we have for looking for a Planet X, there's a great deal of information that comes from ancient sources. And this is where the information gets a little bit tricky and sometimes convoluted with speculation. One of the researchers that we've heard mentioned, Zecharia Sitchin, is a very famous linguist, if you don't know of this name. Zecharia Sitchin is almost 82, I believe, and has been studying Semitic languages for almost his whole life. And he is one of the very few scholars that can actually, I think one of 200 in the world, that can actually read the most ancient language that we have record of on Earth, the first language, which was from the Sumerian culture called cuneiform script, which we'll be getting to tonight. But this Sumerian culture, the first culture we have record of, says some very interesting things. And my personal interest into this idea of a Nibiru isn't that this planet is going to come back and kill us or that it's going to cause world cataclysms. Not that it won't. My interest is in the fact that what we're going to show and substantiate is that this Sumerian culture not only had knowledge of this planet, but all the other information they talked about we can now confirm with modern science. Why this is so intriguing is that they tell us all that they know they learned from the beings that live on this planet, which they called the Anunnaki, which meant those who from heaven come to Earth. So if we do actually find this planet using modern science based on the ancient sources as well, then it holds very high regard that we actually have ancestors on this planet as well. So that's my main concern of interest, is being able to decipher if these beings cited by the Sumerians and filtered through our religions as gods, what if they actually do exist, and we can now substantiate that. Next slide, please. Real quick clip, just showing that Zecharia Sitchin, and unfortunately, I think we're having another video problem. Oh, maybe that'll start going. Just real quickly showing that this is Zecharia Sitchin, and he is going to the Naval Observatory, and this is where he spoke with Dr. Harrington, the lead astronomer. That's Dr. Harrington there, and that's Zecharia Sitchin. This was filmed live at NASA, where Zecharia asked on tape Dr. Harrington, and they compared their notes for a Planet X versus a Nibiru. I highly recommend anyone get this video. It's from this video. What we're seeing here is an excerpt from a video called "Are We Alone?" It's one of videos by Zecharia Sitchin, and I recommend anyone interested in these topics purchase this, because in a nutshell, it really does cover some of the very esoteric points to this information. Next slide, please. So just showing the highlights, Dr. Harrington and Zecharia discussing their two orbital models, the NASA model for a 10th planet, Zecharia Sitchin's model for a Nibiru or a Planet X. Next slide, please. Zecharia Sitchin is, again, a very well-known linguist and has wrote a series of books called the Earth Chronicles, 8 books. He has a new book out now as well called The Lost Book of Enki. And, he has been doing very esoteric research for decades now that clearly document that the Sumerian culture, the knowledge they had, we can now substantiate with modern science, that many of the things they knew of, it's just unbelievable that a culture would pop up right out of the Stone Age and learn all this information. So who do they say taught them? The beings that come from another planet called the Anunnaki. That's a little far-fetched, but again, when we look at the information that I'm going to show you here, it does start to put things into a different perspective. Next slide, please.